One of my all-time favorite directors is Peter Weir. Let me begin this video by telling the story of how I first became aware of his work. On Christmas Day in 2003, my cousin gave me a filmmaker's glossary as a gift. I was just a preteen at the time, but I was growing up as a serious movie buff. There was a section on Peter Weir in the glossary, and although I had never seen any of his movies, I distinctly remember that photo of him sitting in a director's chair in the cornfield, wearing a fedora and a scruffy beard. I thought he looked cool, the way a director should be. Flash forward to Oscar season the following year, and I'm noticing how the film Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World is getting all these Golden Globe and Academy Award nominations, and hey, what do you know? It's directed by Peter Weir. And he keeps getting nominated for Best Director at all the ceremonies. Unfortunately, I had missed Master and Commander during its initial theatrical run, and it hadn't yet been released onto DVD. However, I was curious to know more about Peter Weir, so while I waited to see Master and Commander, I resolved to go to Blockbuster and see if there were any older movies directed by him which I could rent. The first Peter Weir movie I ended up watching was The Mosquito Coast. In retrospect, not the best place to start, because it's such a downbeat film, although I have since come around to appreciating it. At the very least, it tipped me off to what a talented and different director Peter Weir was, so I kept on watching his films. I watched Witness. I watched Dead Poet Society. I watched The Truman Show. And eventually I caught up with Master and Commander as soon as it came out on DVD. They were all great films, but the one that really did it, the one that turned me into a bona fide Peter Weir fan, was Fearless. When I first settled down to watch Fearless, I knew that it was going to be a movie in which Jeff Bridges played a plane crash survivor, but the opening scene was jarring for me. The plane crash has already happened. We see the aftermath, but not the crash. I thought, well, okay, I guess it's not that kind of movie. Instead, it's going to focus entirely on the sensations felt after surviving a horrific accident. Alright, I can live with that. Let's just see where this goes.
Hey! There's more over here! Bring another team! Another team over here on the tail! We're gonna need a lot more help! Are you okay? Is the baby alright? It's okay. You can stay with your dad.
I'm not his father. He was traveling alone. Go with him now.
No,
You'll
please.
be okay.
I want to be with you. Please.
Take him.
Please.
I've got to find the mother. Now go.
Come on. Come with me. You're gonna be alright. Adam, come on. Everyone, please stay where you are. We'll get with you in a minute. Are there any more left? Anybody else in the room?
The plane used in this opening scene is a real DC-10, cut into 3 parts, and the authorities that you see here are the real, local Bakersfield Fire and Police doing a drill of how they would respond to a crash. This sequence has no CGI. It's real. Fearless was written by Rafael Yglesias, and before he wrote it as a screenplay, he wrote it as a book. The idea came from a real-life car accident which Yglesias experienced when he was 26 years old. Accompanying Yglesias in the car was his friend, theater critic Frank Rich, who was on assignment to review a show during the summertime. Although Yglesias knew how to drive, he had no license, so Rich was the one driving. While heading back, Rich became uncomfortable driving and accidentally steered into oncoming traffic. The wheels hit a ditch, the car flipped upside down, the windows blew out, Rich broke his collarbone, and Yglesias, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was thrown clear. Yglesias thought he was going to die in that moment and thought very calmly to himself, "This is it. This is the moment of my death." Having actually survived the accident, Yglesias and Rich were taken to the hospital. After they were treated and released, it took a while to get home, almost all day. At home, because Yglesias was sore all over, his wife urged him to take 1 Percocet. Then he fell asleep for 12 hours. When he woke up, For the next 24 hours, he said whatever he wanted, drank whatever he wanted, touched whatever he wanted, and, in general, he felt no anxieties. Eventually, these strange sensations wore off, but it was an experience which Yglesias never forgot. According to journalist Kate Myers, Yglesias didn't officially begin researching this sensation until the late 1980s, when he was a struggling novelist. His own experience as a crash survivor had been too minor. He was looking for something more dramatic. He was fascinated, for instance, by a story about how Dostoevsky had been sentenced to die, yet on the day of his execution, his senses had been heightened to a surreal degree. Then, in 1989, Yglesias read about the United Airlines Flight 232 crash in Sioux City, Iowa, in which the pilot had rocked the wings back and forth and landed the plane in a cornfield. Yglesias, who had a fear of flying, wondered, what if a passenger knew everything about hydraulics and thus knew that the plane would crash and he would die? This inspired the character of Max Klein.
I'm not scared. But I would like another drink when we're airborne. I should say if we're airborne.
Yglesias realized that the story couldn't just be about Max enjoying himself. There needed to be more to the story. So, knowing that children had also died in the Flight 232 crash, Yglesias came up with the character of Carla, whose son is killed.
You know, I go to church every day. It's the only place I go. Go to pray for my baby's soul.
You go there to talk to God. Gotta talk to somebody.
Out of this research came Fearless. It was Yglesias' 7th novel, and at the time, he considered it to be his best. One thing which makes the book drastically different from the movie is how the book always finds time to linger on every detail of Max's experience, no matter how unpleasant. It goes into graphic detail about everything he smells and every impure sexual thought which crosses his mind. In the scene where Max reunites with an old friend named Allison, in the book, he takes LSD and then has sex with her. Also, the book climaxes with Max having sex with Carla, as both of them become as fearless as possible by giving into their deepest desires, refusing to deny their true physical feelings for one another. Yglesias gave the book to his main editor, who thought it was beautiful and believed it would be published, but was at a loss to figure out how to market it. Insulted, Yglesias declared to his editor that if he didn't guarantee an advertising budget, he would pull the book away from him. And he eventually did pull the book away, after being warned that he wouldn't get a deal with anyone else. However, the book got about 15 rejections. Yglesias was now broke, and he needed to pay back the advance on his book to the publisher who had paid him to write it. Plus, he was the father of 2 sons, so he needed a job. He decided to adapt the book into a spec script, figuring that producers would probably be turned off by the story's cynical characters, yet might be impressed enough to at least hire him to write other things. Little did Yglesias know that 8 months after writing the first draft of the script, the film would soon be in production. One of the Hollywood producers whom Yglesias was connected with was Mark Rosenberg, who had once been an unemployed cab driver, and it was through Rosenberg that Yglesias got his screenplay for Fearless submitted to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers was interested in optioning the script, but they wanted Rosenberg to guarantee that the film would end with Max and Carla getting together and living happily ever after. Rosenberg rejected this proposal, and because of this, and because there was no director attached to the project yet, Warner Brothers declined to option the script. Instead, Rosenberg and his wife, producer Paula Weinstein, decided to option the script themselves, using money which Warner Brothers had given them to develop whatever projects they wanted. During this period, Peter Weir was ready to make a new movie, and he was instructing studio heads and producers, give me things that are unusual or difficult, or what he referred to as broken scripts. When Rosenberg showed the Fearless script to Weir's agent, the agent wasn't keen on giving the script to Weir, but Rosenberg berated the agent until he finally gave in. Weir liked the script, explaining, it was good writing, daring writing, but I thought it was 2 movies. The first 25 pages were a film about how you'd cope with the knowledge that you were going to die. Then there was the second film, which was about how you live once you survive. I couldn't see a way to do it as one film. I was just driving around listening to music, and I realized I could do anything I liked, as long as the story remained about life and death, or rather, love and fear, which was more to the point. You can't say anything about death because you don't know about death. You could certainly talk about fear. The character of Max Klein was also similar to the kinds of protagonists which had carried Peter Weir's previous films. Much like Guy Cobb in The Year of Living Dangerously, Max grows addicted to risk, to the point where he no longer cares if he hurts the people around him in doing so. Having expressed his interest in directing Fearless, Peter Weir wanted to cast Jeff Bridges as Max. The studio wanted Mel Gibson, but Gibson didn't understand the story. The only reason he considered doing it at all was out of loyalty to Weir. However, Gibson was about to make his directing debut with The Man Without a Face. He asked Weir if he'd be willing to wait until after production was complete on that film before shooting Fearless, but Weir did not want to wait, so Gibson declined to star in Fearless. This was fine for Weir, since he ultimately felt that Gibson was wrong for the part of Max anyway. Weir and his wife, Wendy, had also been offered the opportunity to make Remains of the Day, but when given the choice of doing either that movie or Fearless, they chose Fearless, no contest. The book had been set in New York, but Weir had already shot Green Card in New York, and he wanted to change locations for his next project. Thus, he decided to shoot Fearless in San Francisco.
You can't do it! You want to kill me, but you can't!
Warner Brothers immediately acquired Fearless when Weir signed on to direct.
Captain, please return to your seats, put your tray tables up, and fasten your seatbelts.
Now, the book begins with the plane crash. In fact, the crash occupies the first 3 chapters. Peter Weir, however, did not want the film to open that way. So instead of opening the film with Max panicking at the realization that the plane is going down, he took that scene and moved it to around the 30-minute mark of the film.
Very seriously, the problem relates to hydraulic system.
The hydraulics!
We don't have a backup system.
You can't steer! We're going down! This is it. This is the moment of your death. I'm not afraid. I have no fear.
So when I first saw the film and it got to that scene, I remember sitting there and thinking, okay, now are we going to see the crash? Nope. Cut back to the present. Never mind, I thought to myself, it's not that kind of movie, and I need to let go of this morbid fascination that I have with seeing the plane crash. We're not going to see it. Only after casting on the film was complete did Peter Weir actually get around to reading the book. Weir was generally impressed that Yglesias' script had left out so much about the book, which Weir thought was great. Jeff Bridges had the same reaction. After he was given a copy of the book, he loved the parts about Max dropping acid and having sex with Allison, and over dinner, he asked Yglesias why he took those parts out. Yglesias explained that he took this particular sex scene out of the script because, in the book, there's a whole backstory about Max's history of dropping acid in college. Such a backstory, however, cannot be effectively communicated in a 2-hour movie. In the book, Max is faithful to his wife up until the crash, and then he decides to drop acid. But in the movie, what would be the point of letting Max have sex with Allison if he isn't dropping acid? Otherwise, this would have implied that he's always had sexual thoughts about Allison, even when he hasn't been under the influence. Peter Weir suggested that the visual image of Max in the hotel room under the cover with the champagne could imply that Max did sleep with Allison, but Yglesias didn't buy it, and I doubt that very many audiences picked up on it, if indeed that was the intention. Weir and Yglesias came to an understanding that if they ever disagreed on any plot points, Yglesias was allowed to disagree violently with him, just not in front of others. Yglesias himself even made a cameo in the film as a paparazzi.
Don't look so scared.
I'm not scared. I'm not scared of anything.
Scared to kiss me?
I just did kiss you.
I mean, for real.
The relationship between Max and Carla remained the heart of the story, but Peter Weir was repulsed when he found out that Warner Brothers had initially wanted the film to end with Max and Carla living happily ever after with each other. Weir certainly did not want audiences to see Max and Carla living happily ever after with each other, but at some point, he also decided to take out their sex scene. And although Carla was an Italian-American character in the book, Weir decided instead to cast a Puerto Rican-American actress, Rosie Perez. He did, however, cast Isabel Rossellini, an Italian actress, as Max's wife. And although the wife's name had been Debbie in the book, Weir thought the name was too plain for the character, now that Isabel Rossellini was going to be playing her, because her beauty, her intelligence, and her cultural sophistication would help the audience understand why Max needs his wife to save him and bring him back to real life, the state of being both afraid and fearless, neither one nor the other. So Yglesias asked Weir if he wanted him to change the name. Weir lit up and said, "You'd do that? That would be wonderful." And that's why the wife's name was changed in the movie from Debbie Klein to Laura Klein.
What is it, Max?
I want you to save me.
Rosie Perez admits in her autobiography that the night before her first shoot day, she was such a nervous wreck that she actually tried to drop out of the film. However, Peter Weir intuited that she merely felt guilty about her own success. A careful night of rehearsal with the director allowed Perez to settle into the role of Carla with ease.
I let go, Bubble.
Yglesias determined that although the book was internal about death and its complications, the movie needed to overtly refer to death. So Yglesias purposely changed Max's attitude about video games in the movie.
I'm throwing this out. When you die, you don't get another life.
Max, I don't know what you're
Do
talking
you
about.
understand me?
It's not real dying. It's only pretend. I know what dead bodies look like. Why don't you just shut up?
Jonah.
Shut up!
Jonah. Max, give him a break. He's a little boy.
Yeah, and if it was up to you, he'd stay that way.
Dad,
I don't know
I
what that
care
means. I
about
just
the
know I don't want
stupid
him to be
game.
cruel
It
to
means
him.
I don't want him to grow up to be a frightened child in a man's body.
He's just fine, Max. It's you who's in trouble. Now give the game back. Or keep on going, but right out of our lives.
What this scene also illustrates is Max's hypocrisy and his self-righteousness. He claims to be disturbed by Jonah's video games because they grant multiple lives to the player, but Max himself, by his own admission, is living another life. He's a ghost. He's not the same. He believes he's free to do whatever he wants, yet he denies his son those same freedoms. So Laura is correct when she points out that Jonah is not the one in trouble. Max is. Peter Weir hired Maurice Jarre to compose the original score for Fearless, having previously worked with him many times. However, the composer didn't contribute very much music to the film. Weir had initially used U2's song Where the Streets Have No Name merely as a temp track over the scene where Max crashes his car in order to help Carla snap out of her grief, but Warner Brothers liked it so much that they decided to just buy the rights to the song and keep it in the scene. Now, that's pretty moving, I thought. Max just survived death for a second time. And he killed 2 birds with 1 stone by simultaneously easing Carla's pain. And I thought, this is a pretty good movie. I wonder how it's going to end. Alright, I'm going to go on a little tangent here. Remember how I told you that the first Peter Weir movie I ever watched was The Mosquito Coast, and how my first viewing of it was a harsh experience for me? Well, that's because as a preteen, I was not used to seeing Harrison Ford playing such an unlikable protagonist, and what's more, meeting a grisly fate at the end of a film. The Mosquito Coast actually gave me a rude awakening into understanding how Peter Weir makes movies. He likes challenging stories, and he typically rejects neat, conclusive endings in favor of surprising endings which pull the rug out from underneath the audience. Film scholar Jonathan Rayner has written about how Weir's films tend to provoke hypothetical narrative debate after their inconclusive endings, and how the art film trait of unclosed narrative has become a consistent feature of Weir's films. Witness ends with John Book departing from Amish society instead of staying with Rachel, and that's it. The Truman Show ends with Truman leaving the television set, yet we don't get to see his reunion with Sylvia. Gallipoli ends with a harrowing freeze frame of the Mark Lee character getting shot, and we don't get to see what happens to Mel Gibson's character. Master and Commander ends with Jack Aubrey failing to capture the French captain of the Acheron, but hey, at least we were all left with the consolation that he'd pursue him in a sequel, which, at this point I think it's safe to say that there won't ever be a sequel. The Last Wave, I couldn't even tell you what the hell happens at the end of The Last Wave. Picnic at Hanging Rock absolutely refuses to give us an explanation as to how the girls disappeared. It's 100% ambiguous. Fuck you. The end. The conclusion of Dead Poet Society actually makes me feel really good to see the students standing on their desks to honor Mr. Keating, but I also feel unhappy for Mr. Keating because, well, he still lost his job. My point is that frequently, when I watch Peter Weir's films, I'm so caught up in the stories that even when I'm frustrated by the endings, I keep coming back to his films anyway, because they improve with repeated viewings. It's like being on a roller coaster. You enjoy the ride so much that you're inevitably disappointed when the ride is over. So the only solution is, well, to get back on the ride and watch the movie again. However, Fearless is a unique title in Peter Weir's filmography for one simple reason. It's that single film of his where I greedily look forward to the ending. I enjoy the first 2/3 of the film just fine, but the ending is my favorite part. To explain, when I first watched Fearless, the ending, like the endings of Weir's other movies, pulled the rug out from underneath me.
No, Max! Shit. Max! Max!
Is this how it's going to end, I thought? After everything Max has survived, he's finally gonna choke to death on a strawberry? I couldn't believe it. I didn't want Max to die. I don't require that every protagonist survive at the end of every movie, but I have to admit it. I wanted Max to live.
This is it. This is the moment of my death.
And then, that's when it happened. Just when I thought we would never see it, we finally see the plane crash. I believe this is the greatest sequence which Peter Weir has ever directed, because he's working at the height of his powers here. He uses an excerpt from Symphony No. 3, Symphony of Sorrowful Songs by Henryk Górecki over the whole sequence. Initially, it was only meant to be a temp track, but Warner Brothers liked it, so it stayed in the film. And no wonder, because it works stunningly well. Also, Rafael Yglesias takes the haunting dialogue from his book, carries it to the screen, and it's delivered by Jeff Bridges in a way that's so soothing, so comforting, that you feel like he's preparing you for your death.
Everything's okay. All right, now put your head down. Close your eyes. It'll be over soon. Everything is wonderful.
When the crash itself finally happens, Peter Weir brings in his team of wizards, cinematographer Alan Daviau using his famous E.T. style of blinding light, editor William Anderson throwing those dizzying images towards us at a terrifying speed, the special effects team blowing up and tearing the plane apart. It makes you feel like you're really there, spiraling down into hell, no turning back. It's like the world is ending and we are part of it. Max has survived death 3 times in this film, first on the plane, second in the car, but it's the third threat, the strawberry, which turns out to be the most lethal, because while it poses no danger to Max while he's a ghost, he's dangerously vulnerable to it when he's mortal. And right when we're dreading that it's all over, Max is resurrected. Laura does precisely what Max has asked her to do. She saves him, just as Max himself once saved Carla and a handful of the plane crash survivors. What makes this ending so wonderful and so cathartic is that it allows us to bask in Max's gratefulness at simply being alive. During his first 2 near-death experiences, he showed little emotion, but now his mortality has shocked some sense back into him, and we hope that his family and life itself has become more precious to him. We don't know if his marriage to Laura will last. That's not important. What's important is that he made it, and this time his family was there to witness it. Max was dead and is alive again. I remember how I reacted as a young teenager when the movie cut to black in that moment and then the words directed by Peter Weir appeared on the screen. At first I thought, that's the end? But then immediately it occurred to me that, of course that's the end. That's the only way it could have ended. You couldn't ask for a better ending. This ending is perfect. And in that moment, I realized that Fearless was my favorite Peter Weir film. Max's final words in the novel were, I'm alive, and I'm afraid. Peter Weir took out the line about Max saying he's afraid because audiences might have been confused by what exactly Max is afraid of. Of course, what Max means when he says that line in the book is that he's finally feeling fear again, for the first time since the crash, and that's a good and healthy thing for a human being to be capable of fear. Instead of saying the line out loud, however, you simply see a look of fear on Jeff Bridges' face. So then why isn't this film more well known amongst the general public? Warner Brothers assumed that Fearless would be a big-time Academy Awards nominee, so they scheduled it for release in the autumn of 1993. They screened the hell out of it in New York and Los Angeles, only opening it in 4 theaters. Unfortunately, the film never reached for more than 400 theaters, and ultimately it didn't receive wide release. The critical reception at the time was mixed. The studio thought the film would spread through slow word of mouth, but it didn't. It only got 1 Academy Award nomination, Best Supporting Actress for Rosie Perez. And for a couple of decades, the film was hard to find in good quality on home video. It finally got a decent-looking Blu-ray release in 2013, a whole 20 years after its theatrical release, but the Blu-ray came with no special features, aside from the theatrical trailer. So I'm still waiting for a more comprehensive home video release of Fearless, with more informative special features, interviews with the cast and crew, something, I don't know, that's a little more worthy of a film this great. To quote Roger Ebert, Fearless is like a short story that shines a bright light, briefly, into a corner where you usually do not look. It makes you realize how routine life can become, how it is actually possible to be bored despite the fact that a universe has evolved for eons in order to provide us with the 5 senses by which we perceive it. If we ever really fully perceived the cosmic situation we are in, we would drop unconscious, I think, from shock. That is a little of what Fearless is about. Thanks for watching.